Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be continuing our coverage of the 2014 Rapid Chess Championships. We're in round 12 right now. Magnus Carlsen has a small advantage over Vishy Anand by half a point. If he can go ahead and win this with only 3 matches left, definitely well on his way to potentially actually winning the 2014 Rapid Chess Championships, which would be crazy since he just won the regular chess championship. So, very important match. He does have the white pieces against Vishy Anand playing the black pieces, so definitely going to be an interesting match as both players are definitely trying to get as many points as possible. Magnus Carlsen starts with pawn to d4, the queen pawn opening, queen to d5. We have the queen's gambit, and we see the Slav defense respond by Vishy Anand right here. After the capture, knight to c3, we do see an interesting move from Magnus Carlsen. He plays bishop here to f4. You're pretty much always going to see knight to f3 in this particular case, but changing it up a little bit, Magnus Carlsen definitely knows a lot of different openings, and you can always transpose into some of the same lines, but maybe trying to catch his opponent off guard by playing a bishop here to f4 pretty early. Vishy responds with knight to c6, pawn e3 solidifying, opening up the door for the light square bishop. Bishop to f5 sort of looks like Vishy Anand is just kind of mirroring exactly what Magnus Carlsen's doing. Rook to c1, getting it into this open file right here on the c file, definitely where you want your rooks to be. Vishy responds with the same thing. Knight to f3. If we kind of look at it, this is about as equal as you are going to get. Both sides have virtually the same setup of Vishy decides to go ahead and complete that with pawn here to e6. So yes, white has the next move coming, but both sides pretty much equal in this position because they've just been marrying each other on board. So we now see queen here to b3, a little bit active. Bishop to b4, so Vishy decides he wants to not quite get his queen involved. Bishop here to b5. Magnus Carlsen still wants to do exactly what his opponent is doing as well. We do see the bishop take, so Magnus Carlsen's going to have a double bishop pair. He takes back with his pawn. It's always important to know what you should take back with. With pawns, you want to be taking back towards the center. Rook would be actually somewhat of a mistake here. Then his opponent could play knight to e4, attacking, let's say the rook comes back here to c1, queen to a5. All of a sudden, it gets pretty tricky for white's position. Black has much more aggression going on this particular setup right here. So probably much better that he decided to take with his pawn. And then castle on the king side. Magnus Carlsen eventually needs to go ahead and castle because right now he doesn't have as much safety. We see the bishop takes, so Magnus Carlsen no longer has the bishop pair. The queen takes up here on b7, trying to gain some material, so Magnus Carlsen is up material on board, but it definitely gets interesting from here. So queen to c8, actually baiting his opponent to play queen to a7, and especially in a rapid chess tournament, it kind of has to send your alarms off. There's no reason that Vishy Anand would just give up material, but it kind of takes a little bit to figure out, what he would be up to. If queen takes here on a7, this is kind of a poison pawn. You're going to see rook to c3, and this is going to be very bad. The rook needs to stay kind of close with rook here to d1 so that the rook doesn't come down here to c1. He has protection by this queen here on c8, so he doesn't have too many options. But after the rook comes to a d1, bishop to c2 is going to be very, very bad for Magnus Carlsen. So he picks right. Instead, he decides to go ahead and gobble up this material here on c8. We now see the rook swing over. Very important to now double up the rooks here to attack this pawn here on c3. Because again, Vishy Anand is down in material, but he can get that back if and when he wants to. We see knight to e5. Nice little outpost move for the knight. Doesn't really matter. Vishy Anand's coming down to take material. And now Vishy Anand has a pretty active position. Both sides are equal in material, but this rook is a lot more active. It's not going to be too difficult for Magnus Carlsen to get his rook involved into the game. So I would say it's about equal. Maybe right now Black has a very, very small advantage. Magnus Carlsen now plays castle on the king side, which he doesn't have a whole lot of options. The rook can just come down here to c1. That's going to be bad. So really, you need to be castling in the first place, get your rook involved into the game. Pawn to h6, pawn to h4. Both sides just kind of jockeying for position here. Knight to e4. His opponent has a nice little outpost, and so does black right here. Pawn to g4. Magnus Carlsen is looking to extend an attack on the king side. Vishy, Anand's not having any of that. Rook swinging over here to b1. So Magnus Carlsen's getting some counterplay with his own rook. He has a fairly aggressive position as well, so that's going to be fine for him. We do see an exchange of pawns. The bishop comes back here. So both sides, again, somewhat same setup. This rook is attacking the rook, forced to move, so comes back here. g7, nice little safe square, now attacking the pawn here on a7. Bishop coming back to e4. Nice little outpost. Again, outposts in the middle of the board tend to do a lot better than on the side of the board. It's not bad if they're on the side, but they usually just do a lot better on board. Now, because the knight here on e5 is also protecting the square on f7, white decides to go ahead and take here on f7, checking his opponent. The king is forced to come back here to g8, and then Magnus Carlsen continue to push his forward. So he is up in material, trying to force his action a little bit. We do see an exchange right here. And then Magnus Carlsen takes back with his minor piece. And this is an interesting setup right here going into the endgame. So Magnus Carlsen has 4 pawns to his opponent's 4 pawns. He does have 2 minor pieces. His opponent has a rook. So Vishy is going to be looking to get back some of that material. It's going to be very difficult for Magnus Carlsen to hang on to his pawn over here. But then Magnus Carlsen should have a pretty easy rest of the game to gobble up these pawns, get his king active in the game, and really just block Vishy off from doing too much on board. We now see rook to c1, king is forced to come up, and then that pawn's going to fall back. And once you have a passed pawn, which Vishy does, he understands his one chance of winning is pushing this pawn up the board and getting a queen here on a1. So that's what he's going to be focused on. But Magnus Carlsen, again, as we talked about, he can use his minor pieces to just gobble up this material. So his first move is going to be taking here on g5. He can next take here on e6 and just continue down. Pawn to a4. Again, there's no real threat. The rook's not doing too much. It's not very active here. So Magnus Carlsen can easily gobble up this material here on e6 and continue. Interesting, though, in the game, Magnus Carlsen played king to d1. Kind of let his foot off the gas. After the game, he mentioned that the next few moves from him just completely were terrible. He definitely wishes he could take them back. Now rook to b2, and this gets a little interesting because now if Magnus Carlsen decides to take on e6, then the rook can come up to a b6, and one of these pieces is going to fall. Magnus Carlsen in game was 1 move late and does decide, in fact, to take with his knight here on e6. So rook to b6. And then another mistake, the knight comes back here to f4. Now, one thing he could have done to save face a little bit, he could have played king here to c2, and then after the rook takes on d6, we can have knight to c5, nice little outpost, going to gain this material back on board. All of a sudden, this white king is pretty active. It's going to be very difficult for black to hold on and win. White has a pretty good game here. He can eventually take this pawn right here, and then he can just start to push his pawns up the board. But instead, he plays the questionable knight to f4. Yes, it is attacking this pawn, but rook taking here on d6 also defends this pawn. Magnus Carlsen said in the particular, after press conference that this was kind of his fatal mistake right here, and he had flashes of going back to a few years ago when he was dominating a big tournament and just plummeted the rest of the way and ended up losing. So things are definitely not looking good. Trying to come out with a draw in this particular match. The rook's going to swing over here to b6. Again, Vishy is going to start pushing forward. And so both sides just kind of jockeying. White's really trying to keep this pawn from going anywhere further. Vishy is trying to keep the king from moving past this b file, and at the same time getting his king involved into the game so he can kind of stop these pawns if Magnus Carlsen decides he wants to push those forward. Pawn to e4, Magnus Carlsen, there's no way right now to attack this pawn, so he needs to go ahead and start pushing with his pawns. King to f7, centralizing in-game. You always want to get your kings involved. They can be a very, very valuable piece. King to c1, not too many moves. Now the king can't come over, or he could come to b1, but then he's going to lose his knight right here. The rooks usually belong behind your pawn so they can kind of push forward. This knight's kind of relegated to defense mode right here, coming back here to b7. Again, b7 is very crucial because he wants to keep the king from moving over here. Once the king's over here, he can kind of go wherever and take this material on board. So rook to a b7, pushing forward a little bit. There's no way to hold on to all this material. And so we do have the pawn coming up here to g7, but again, the rook on b8 is still kind of holding on to that. So rook over here taking on g8. Now the king can come over and start to attack, but another dagger on board is rook to g3, attacking and also protecting this pawn. Both sides do continue to move a little bit. All Vishy Anand's trying to do is to get his king involved into the action. He's going to kind of take the long way around the board, but Magnus Carlsen can just kind of move his pieces around, cannot stop the pressure, the eventual promotion of this pawn, unless he wants to give up his knight, and then Vishy Anand would just have a rook and a king. So Magnus Carlsen in this particular game loses. Vishy Anand goes up a half a point going into round 3. Good news is Magnus Carlsen would redeem himself and go on to win the tournaments by having a great last few games. So congratulations to Magnus Carlsen for somehow winning the 2014 Rapid Chess Championships. We have the Blitz portion going on Thursday and Friday. It's definitely going to be interested to see who wins that. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, learned something, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.